Hello. Can you guys hear me? Hello. Can you guys hear me? Well, that's yours. That's yours. Hello. Yes. Hello. Hello. Maybe. Yes. No.
I see your name next to your. So who's gonna turn on their stuff? Are you going to?
No, I just like pulled him up and lost his face. I'm supposed to, but it's fine. I'm sorry.
No, I know you did.
Okay. What were you asking? I had to close him out because I couldn't take it. Hold on.
Wait, I don't even see anybody. Oh, there, finally.
Hi.
Who's the microphone? Can you guys see or hear me?
There we go.
I'm off.
It's mine.
I'm totally off.
I just can't find the page.
I muted my microphone up here too, but it's still like totally dinghy.
I closed the page.
Nice.
I'm turning it off. See, you can hear me. Cause havoc.
You never have to be on that blue. Gotta be up here too. You gotta mute.
But
She's joined. She's right here. Did you mute? I don't know. Are you muted now? Fine. I don't know.
hello.
Hi.
No? Yes? Maybe?
Yes, we hear you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Mr. Garrison, I know Mr. Garrison's in the IEP meeting. Mr. Atkins,
And now you're totally off. I can't.
another.
But if she's off, why then? Because my microphone is muted.
Hello. All right, so the mics need to be muted and speakers except for one if you're all in the same room. Again.
Yeah.
Okay.
Again, because it's Karen.
I'm gonna give up. There's a lot of pressure. Is he waiting for me?
I don't know if anyone's even here.
We're starting to watch.
Oh, okay. Are you guys hearing me okay?
I'm getting echo.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. I'm going to give you the screen that I'm presenting now, and we're going to go ahead and get started. How is everybody today? Thumbs up, thumbs down, medium, so-so. It's been a lot of running around today. I'm excited to be here. This is always probably my favorite part of any day, and actually get to do PD for the adults. So I enjoy that. I enjoy it a lot bringing in, and I'm happy to be leading today. I won't be leading all of you first, but today I do get to lead. One of the main things that we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about a few different things, but most importantly, we're going to reiterate why we're here. We're also going to reset our focus a little bit, because last week we talked about the overarching goals we have. I'm going to focus in a lot more on exactly what we're going to produce as a team, and exactly what that means to be part of that production. And that's really specifically why we're here. And what we're looking for right now is where we're going to be. So it is already 3:40 4. So I'm going to go ahead and get right to it. I'm sorry that I don't have this set up better at this time. I will definitely get more used to the room, and unfortunately I had to be here with like about 5 minutes. Those of you that saw me come running in, saw me try to change it, and I couldn't. Next week I will definitely have it much better. I want to say thank you. Absolutely. Thank you so much for letting us use your room. I know this space is more easily accessible for everybody, and the fact that we have to in a classroom instead is also a huge benefit. Hardy Brown people, it's great to see you. I love being able to have you guys connect with us this way, and I hope that this is as useful for you guys as it is for us. A couple things. We recorded last week's session, and we're going to record every session, so there's always a place to go back and look. So if for some reason you can't be here at one of our sessions, or if you come late and you want to find out what you missed, it's all available to you. I will send out the links to where I'm storing all of those videos. For the people at Hardy Brown, when we separate to have a conversation, I need you to mute your mic. Because if you're talking louder than we're talking, what happens is we hear your voices and we don't hear anybody else's voices, and it all sounds like a big garbled mess. So we need to turn off one set of mics at least, and so that way we can actually hear kind of what's going on all over the place. So when we have those conversations, I'll ask you to mute before, and then just somebody can monitor the chat, and I'll let you know when it's time to come back, or I'll give you a hint with the video. Okay? Is everybody okay with that? Did everybody hear me at Hardy Brown? I'm looking for a thumbs up, perhaps. Yep. Good? Okay. Very good. All right. So we're going to start by talking about kind of what we are gearing up for. And as you know, this is the time of year where we start to put a bow on this year and start to really think about next year. And of course, as we really start to think about next year, the thing that we're thinking about now is actually implementing the Common Core standards. And that's a big undertaking. And I know from both your guys' response last week as well as the response of our teachers who completed the survey. And by the way, if you could, at your next meeting, give your teachers a gentle nudge, or maybe not so gentle nudge, with the help of your principal, to have everybody respond to the survey at some point, because right now we have about 16 responses out of everybody. And so it's certainly not the whole school. We do have quite a few responses from William Lee. We have quite a few responses from Fortune School. We have 1 response from Allen Rowe, and I think we have 2 responses from Hardy Brown. So a big nudge to get everybody to respond to the survey would be fantastic, because that'll give us more information that we can use going forward. Okay? But really why we're here is to start talking about the professional development. Over the summer, there's going to be opportunities for professional development that we do every year. They include things like summer symposiums, the Summer Institute, and those are the kind of planning days we will have. These are system-wide. So on some of those days, we're going to come together as a big group, and on some days, you guys are going to be on site providing a lot of this. Oh, that's new then. That would be, excuse me. And so when we come together for those, what we're doing here is going to help make you guys the resident experts. When somebody on your site needs support after the initial rollout, which Rob and Craig and I will definitely be there for, to get the rollouts going and to introduce all the tools, but we're having you develop the tools specifically so it makes it easier to help other staff members as they go through and start to complete the tools. And so those things will happen over the summer as we really start to think about where Common Core is. So the big thing that we really want to do is we're going to focus on 3 areas. We're going to focus on long-term planning and assessment. We're going to focus on text dependency, and of course the math practice standards. And those are the committees that we broke up into last week. We will definitely be getting back into those committees, probably starting as early as next week. Today, however, we're really going to take a focus. We're going to focus in specifically on our long-term planning tool. And so specifically what we want to have in our long-term planning tool, and some of this we covered last year during our summer symposium and our PD last year, but what we really want to have is an ability to align our curriculum to the Common Core state standards. And when we initially looked at it, the first thought we had was, well, we're going to break up the curriculum and take it in pieces and so on and so forth. The more that we thought about it, the more we realized that the curriculum still covers the vast majority of what we need. Do we need to supplement it? Absolutely. Do we need to think about how we deliver it? Absolutely. But the reality is it's designed to also go along with student development. And while the standards have changed, child development hasn't. And so doing it in the order that the curriculum provides is still going to be an important way to make sure that our students are really getting what they need. So we've taken a look and gone backwards. Instead of aligning our curriculum to an assessment, we're going to align the assessment to our curriculum. We're going to align the Common Core standards-based assessment questions to our curriculum. So it's going to work in that reverse order. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to identify which Common Core state standards are covered in each theme or chapter. Now, clearly I'm focusing in on math and ELA, which is where the Common Core standards live right now. And we know that our curriculum is divided into themes, and we know that our math curriculum is divided into chapters. And so really what we're going to do is take a look at the content standards as well as the crosswalks that we delivered to you during the summer symposium. And that first starting place is going to be all about making sure that we know which standards fall where in our curriculum. And so the very first step is going to be to identify which Common Core standards are covered in each theme or chapter. Our second step is to identify which themes or chapters will be completed within 3 testing weeks. And so this is really sort of the point that we need to drive home. We have the ability to design our own assessment. We have a product that gives us a tool to do that, as well as resources to pull from to give us test questions and item types, as well as materials to pull from that are aligned. So once we know what our curriculum covers, we can then develop an assessment. And we need to have 3 benchmarks. And as you know, the benchmark question is the question that comes up every day. And really what we need to do is understand, and this is where you guys come in, because you're the experts. You're the experts in your curriculum. You're the experts in the kindergarten curriculum. You're the experts in 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, all the way up through 6th and 7th grade. You guys are the experts in the curriculum. So you know about how much can be completed at what time. And so we really need your expertise here to identify how much should be done by each assessment window. And those assessment windows, we have a couple options. We're going to make a choice here today. I'm going to ask for your input. But there's a couple options we have. We know that we have to have an entry-level assessment, right? And we always do that so we can measure where our students came in and where they are at the end of the year, as well as measure along the way. This guides our instruction. This guides and tells us what we need to do, which standards we need to focus on more, which ones we maybe need to focus on less. We absolutely have to have our first benchmark has to be around the end of the first trimester. So we could definitely look at the trimester 1 end as a date. One of the reasons for that is it's a reporting date for us. That's one of the dates that we have to report to our office. So in the past, we've said, here's a benchmark that happens at the end of first trimester, and give the one that's in the curriculum right where it is. And what happens all the time? We have a situation where the one that's in the curriculum doesn't necessarily line up with what you've already taught. And so we need to get past that this time. Our big goal is to make sure that the assessment is going to assess what we expect to have been taught during that time, not what something else tells us that. And so we're going to use your expertise to really say, okay, should we be done with theme 1 or theme 2 by the end of the semester? The reason I say theme 1 or theme 2 is because think about what do we do that we take the first 10 days of school and we use it to teach what? culture. So that makes us a little bit different than everybody else, because a lot of curriculums, they jump in, they expect our teaching on day one. I have to take those 10 days to teach culture. So knowing that, and knowing we're not asking you to finish what the curriculum says you have to have finished. We're saying, what do you think you should be done with? And at that point, we need to know what standards should be completed, and we're going to develop an assessment for it. Now, once we make that decision, we're going to and that's what we're going to push to make sure that we actually complete that amount of curriculum in time to do that. Okay. Our second one is our second benchmark. Traditionally, we've had a midterm around winter break. And this is where we've gotten lots of mixed response. And again, this is where we want to make sure, number one, we're going to push that all the way back to the end of second trimester. Because again, that's when our reporting is. Okay, and as we push it back, again, we're going to take a look. Which themes or chapters should you have finished between the end of first trimester and the end of second trimester? What standards are covered there? What Common Core standards are covered there? And then we'll develop the benchmark that we create, and that's what we will test. We'll only test for what you expect to have finished by then. That's why we have the experts in the room. You guys have been identified as people who know how to use the curriculum. And so we're relying on that expertise to make sure that we have a reasonable expectation that all teachers should be able to get through this amount of curriculum at this date and teach to the Common Core level. Now, is there going to be hiccups in the road and bumps in the road on this? Of course not. This is our first time doing it. But we're going to do our best to try and get to that point. And by doing that, we assure that when we report, all of our report makes sense. That's one of the things we have the hardest time with every year. And honestly, it comes up, and it's a reason why we could be not. You know? So when our reporting isn't clear, and we can't give a specific reason, like this is what our data shows, that puts us in danger. And we really have to make sure that we are taking care of that. This is really one of the first times we have an opportunity to sort of develop it the way that we think works the best. The third benchmark can happen at two different places. And it depends on what grade level. The third benchmark can be the one that you give just before the Smarter Balance, not just before, but a couple weeks before the Smarter Balance test, and should be. If you're not in a testing grade, then clearly you have to the end of the year to do it. So this is where the option comes in. We can have a third benchmark, which can be our cumulative test for the whole year. Or we could have a third benchmark, which for testing grade is cumulative, and a final. And what we're saying right now is there's not necessarily a reason to have both. If you think that we would be better off just having a third benchmark instead of a third benchmark and a final, we'll create a third benchmark, and that's all we'll have. If you think that a final would still be something that is useful to you, and I can definitely think of reasons why that would be the case, for grades that are not testing, having a third benchmark in between the second benchmark and the final could be like a midway point, just to see where you are. It could be that point where you decide, this is what I'm going to go back and reteach to make sure when my students take the final, they're ready to go. It could mean for testing grades that you now have something that you can have your students aim for. In other words, you have a final, so there's no reason to stop going and doing what you need to do because the Smarter Balance test is already passed. I know from my own experience that that was one of the biggest things that I always had to worry about after the CST. Right? Yeah. So at the end of CSTs, I really had to make sure, okay, my students knew there was still a final. If that's something you guys want, then that's something we can also develop. We're going to develop all of those things. And then the last thing, after we identify it, we're going to develop a system-wide benchmark assessment that's aligned to the identified testing. So we're really going to be asking you to help us figure out what standards are covered where. And when we do that, we're going to build the benchmarks, and then we're going to work backwards from the benchmarks to do the rest of the plan. The rest of the plan starts with the looking at.
Until 4:30.
technical, as well as the manufacturing. But beyond that,
The thing.
I told them they're not getting it.
They don't
So I
even.
want you to
we
know.
know
Perfect. They don't get them.
other major standard clusters that we need to focus on. So those sessions are all about. We may break you up into grade levels to really get additional support in each of those areas. This is going to help provide the roadmap for the PD that we need to start looking for those extra materials, not only materials, but how to teach the materials we have to the depth that we need them to in order to make sure we're meeting the Common Core master. Question. Okay. All right. So that is sort of where I stopped talking. I have 2 templates to show you. And you'll be able to access it. I'm going to share out the PowerPoint with you in just a moment. And you'll have access to it. The 2 templates, there's 2 specific ways that we've looked at the template, and it really depends on how you like to see it. And, the template itself is not the expectation. The template is just a starting place for you. And what we want to do is start having a conversation about what works about this one, what doesn't work, what do we need to add to it, what do we need to take away from it, what makes sense, what's efficient. I know in the past that we've just said, here's the template, finish it. And that's what happened last year. And some of you loved the templates that I developed, others of you hated it. And so what we need to make sure we do this year is we develop something that it's not just for me. And that's really true because I'm not the expert. You guys are the expert. Okay. Questions about that? Right. So template 1, I'm going to show you right now. This is template 1. And remember, this is just for before we get into, oops, you're not seeing that. A second. Aha. So this is template 1. Template 1, this is the first one that I developed and started to think about. And remember, we just have the 3 benchmarks. You could possibly plug in a 4th if you want to. And that's something that we'll take. We'll come to a consensus on what we need today. But we'll decide if we want. It'll just have one more section at the end that says final. And essentially what you see here, if you look at it, is we've got our first unit on culture, but then before benchmark 1, we know we have to finish theme 1. You may add theme 2 to this if you think your grade level and your and the subject area says we should add a second theme to it. Sorry about that. I'm trying. Is it sounding better now as I get closer?
Yes.
I just saw you guys' note. Sorry about that. And then theme 2 and theme 3 happen before benchmark 2. Again, if you know the curriculum and you think, hey, we can do more than that before benchmark 2, or hey, we can't even do that much. We're only going to get through half of theme 3 in that time because winter break falls right in the middle of it and there's just no way. Okay? Then that's something that I need to hear back from you. And that's where you have to start having that conversation. Today's conversation is how easy is it to use it. So the conversation about what should go where, how much you should cover, is going to happen over the summer when you're actually working with your teams. It's not just today. It's not that we're not going to answer those questions today. I'm more concerned about, does the tool work the way it is now? And the third one is benchmark 3. Now, I have to give a little disclaimer here. When I originally did this on Microsoft Word allows you to merge cells. So benchmark 1 really looked like it covered these 2 boxes. Benchmark 2 really looked like it covered these 2 boxes. And benchmark 3 did the same thing there. That's not something that's available in Google Docs right now. Google Docs doesn't allow you to merge cells unless you merge all of the cells. And so this is why it looks this way right now. We thought it was important enough to have it in Google Docs to do it this way, because this way you can actually share not only within schools, but of course across the state. So that way everybody can work on it together. That is sample 1. And I'm going to put this off to the side right now. And then I'm going to show you, maybe, sample 2. All right, so template 2 is very similar to template 1. And if you look at it, instead of having the benchmark as part of the table, it just says for benchmark 1. What are you going to complete during benchmark 1? And it shows, it starts with, sorry about that, I'm taking that out already. It starts with the culture and entry-level assessment, but then you can see theme 1, and theme 1 is all part of benchmark 1. And then what you see is instead of having them stacked on top of each other, in the other template, they were stacked on top, one on top of the other. The content standards came first. You went through, you looked at your curriculum, you listed the content standards. And then underneath it, you had to use the crosswalk to get to the Common Core standards. In this template, the difference is they're right next to each other. So theme 1 has, or chapter 1 and 2, theme 1 and chapter 1 and 2, and you have the aligned Common Core standards, and then you could put your content standard here and your Common Core standard there. If you continue to go down, the next day, or the next page, it breaks it out a little bit more. So benchmark 2 covers themes 2 and 3. Again, this is just for example. So you could add themes to this or subtract themes for it. But again, what you have is what are the content standards that are covered, and you'll find that directly in your curriculum. And then what, using the crosswalk, you'll align the Common Core standards. Okay? And then the same thing on the last page there. And again, we have the option of adding a final if we want to or not. This is just a starting point. And the idea here is once we've gone through and done this part, that makes it a lot easier to go in and develop those assessments. So this is where I need your guys' feedback. First of all, let's talk about the difference between having a final versus not having a final. In other words, do we want 3 benchmarks and a final, or do we want 3 benchmarks? And that's it. And the third one is the cumulative one. So I really want to hear your guys' feedback on this. I want to hear from everybody, so I think the best way to do this is to kind of go around the room. I'm going to let you guys talk about it for a little bit. If you guys could mute your mic while you're talking about it, and then when you come back and share out what you talked about, you can unmute your mic then. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so you guys go ahead and mute your mic, and then let's talk about what we see here. What do you think about in terms of using a final versus 3 benchmarks and no final? So does anybody have an opinion one way or another to start with? Yeah.
Coincidentally, the kindergarten team and I just had a conversation about this sort of today. Not the exact question, but I would prefer the 3 benchmarks without the final.
Okay.
Because in our grade level, we administer the test on an individual.
Right.
And it's very time consuming.
Absolutely.
And the amount of instructional time taken away could cover
Absolutely.
So that would guide.
That makes perfect sense to me. That is definitely something that we came up with as part of that conversation when we were talking about the benchmark versus the final. There is such a thing as over-testing. Plain and simple. We know it exists. We know that there's a point where we're saturating our kids with tests instead of giving great instruction. So that's definitely one argument for that. Does anybody disagree with that sentiment? And why? I guess would be the key part. So it kind of sounds like I'm just kind of reading body language here and the fact that nobody's jumping up. I'm going to say the opposite end of it. For me, I think the 3 benchmark has a very strong, there's good cause behind it. I think the only thing that I'm scared of is if I'm a testing grade and I give my 3rd benchmark before the Smarter Balance test, what am I holding my kids, how am I holding my kids accountable from the end of the Smarter Balance test to the end of the school year? That's the only thing I have. And I'm sure as amazing, awesome teachers as our 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th grade teachers are all going to be, that they all can come up with a project that is graded, that has a huge impact on grades, and you can do it that way. There's a lot of things that you can definitely do. But that would be the only drawback I see to having 3 benchmarks, keeping in mind that the 3rd benchmark would not come before the Smarter Balance test for lower grades.
So I'm just curious, what's the reasoning behind the benchmark being before the Smarter Balance test for the testing grades and not for others?
Yeah, so very specifically, we are looking for an indicator of what the students know as they go into the test. And the 3rd benchmark would literally be something that we would expect you to give in a window that ends not more than 2 weeks before the Smarter Balance test, because you would be using that data to go back and reteach, which has traditionally been how we've done things as we set up for the CST here. Now, if we decided that we were going to do the 3rd benchmark and we had a very strong plan in place to have indicators without giving the 3rd benchmark ahead of time, I think that's something that we can consider. But that's a conversation that we'd really have to be very astute in our planning and in the assessments that we were using to make sure there was an alignment and we really had an understanding of A, what our students knew going into the test, so we had sort of a predictor of how we were going to do. That's one of the things that we always want to have, is sort of that, okay, what do we think is going to happen? We want to see how closely aligned we are. And then 2, we want to make sure that we're catching any of those gaps. So we're going back and reteaching them on a very regular basis, so we're not necessarily cramming the reteaching in to the last 2 weeks. I'm definitely open to that idea. If that was the case, we would put the 3rd benchmark after the Smarter Balance. I do think that for our testing grades, there's a potential for that test not getting the results that you would normally get on that kind of a benchmark, because it would be after the Smarter Balance test, so you may have a problem with that. But that's definitely something that we could consider. I would love to hear from upper grades on that thought process.
I like the 3 benchmarks, but for the upper grade, I understand 100% where you're coming from when it comes to the individual testing. For me, in particular, when it comes to the older students, I guess the only reason that I would see to still include that final is just that some students just take longer to get, and they may need that one extra opportunity to show what they know, to show that they've done what they needed to do in order to make it to the next level. So when I'm thinking in my head, like we do the we're talking student, and we're looking 80% or higher to go to the next grade level. You still have 2 months to get 5%. But how are you going to show that? I mean, I know that we can give them a smaller version of the test, but I mean, as a benchmark style assessment that we're looking at to see, what you learned over the course of the school year. If our last test comes in April, but you needed May and a week in June to get to where you need to be, then that's when that final comes up and those flags start to come up.
That's how they can rebuild their grade, in other words, to
Yeah.
show what they know so they could be promoted even if they didn't necessarily do well on the Smarter Balance test.
Right.
Got it. I agree with that. I can definitely see that part. Miss Williams, you're in 3rd grade, so I'm going to ask do you agree or disagree with what Marcus said in terms of that?
I think overall I agree with that. And my question is, does the benchmark giving a final, does it have to be about organization-wide kind of thing? I mean, this is about transition to Common Core standards is about student learning.
Right.
So do we make that evaluation based on the benchmarks that we have to report out to powers that be?
Right. So we definitely have a 3rd benchmark that we have to report out to the powers that be. We don't have to do a 3rd benchmark and a final that has to be reported out. We have to report out once per session, once per trimester. And the reason for that is that's how they're tracking our growth. So I think the idea that, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think what you're saying is if your students need it, then you give them a final, and if they don't need it, then you don't. Is that basically kind of what we're getting at? What do you think, Ms. Howard?
We're looking at the pros for this final. I kind of lean on the 3 benchmark thing because of bunch of tests.
Yeah.
3 areas after the smart balance. I want to lean more towards doing activities that are seeing the culmination of learning, and not so much how you're going to do on test.
Okay.
So I would be more prone to do things that would bring, projects in that would bring in their whole learning to see what they've accomplished and how they're thinking.
Okay. So I think I'm going to try and summarize what you guys said and tell me if I'm wrong. I think the gist of what I'm hearing is that the best way for us is to have, yes, we know we have to have the benchmark that is cumulative and is the one we report with. And so 3 benchmarks works. In some classes, you may feel the need to give a student a final to show that they have made up the ground that they needed to make up between the 3rd benchmark and the final. And if you feel that's necessary, that's something that you will do. If you don't feel it's necessary, you may do a culminating project instead. And that culminating project may be just as functional as the final that Mr. Atkins did for his students. It would just depend. We would really leave that part to teacher choice, keeping in mind that the 3rd benchmark is the benchmark that we're using to report, and keeping in mind that for our testing grades, that benchmark is going to be given a couple weeks before the test. So unless we decide we're going all the way up, but we have a tracking system in place. And then the question becomes, what's that tracking system? So does that sound right? Did I get everybody's information correctly?
We're still, the smart balance is still being given, we're still being given the same window.
Yeah.
That we have.
Yeah. So the latest that we can make the smarter balance happen is that month of May. That is literally, and trust me, we push it out as far as we can. We do that every year. I was actually in on the process of figuring out our testing dates. They give us a window. We look at the window and we say, okay, how long is it going to take us to do the test? All right, we're going to that. If it's 3 weeks, we're going to that last 3 weeks. And they give us like a month and a half. There are some schools that are doing smarter balance testing in mid-April, which clearly wouldn't work for us. So we're going to push it out as far as we can, but keeping in mind that we're going to want to have an idea of, be able to predict how we're going to do on the smarter balance test before the results actually come out, because our report should be fairly in alignment with what happens when we get the smarter balance results the following year. If that's not in alignment, then we have a problem. That's something else that we have to be very aware of, because if our scores look better on us and then the scores for the smarter balance test come out and they're the complete opposite, then we're going to have questions to answer that we can't answer. And so we've got to make sure that we're very, very aware of that. You have a question?
Well, I think that the final issue, I think it's still a potential organization-wide tool. So even if we don't do a traditional benchmark style final, that we should still have a discussion maybe about having something that is in common, whether it be a performance task, culminating type project that would still be an assessment of all of those standards that we could still use to bump up student grades. I would like to see that, just so that we have something to talk about.
Right, at the end of the year. Yeah, I actually think that's a very good point. I'm going to go to Craig and then I'll come back to Ms. Howard. I'm going to, I told them we were going to share out in 1 more minute.
Oh, okay.
And then we're going to pull them in too. No, we're going to pull them in too, and we're going to have them speak, and then I'm going to try and summarize everything that we said, and I'll let you guys correct me once that happens. Okay? Ms. Howard and Mr. Gambino, and then I'm going to pull them back in.
And just briefly on that note, with the organization, I believe that it should be those things that we give should be organizational wide. Because it's not only for students to get that last thumb up, because as you go through, and maybe this is my area of thinking, you should be progressing all the way through the whole entire year.
Absolutely.
I worry when I do things that allow you to just think over the hump.
Right.
That kind of bugs me, but that's my personal thing.
Mm-hmm.
But also, if we can use these organizational things as a way to check how we are doing,
mm-hmm.
We get together and look
mm-hmm.
at our own data together to see, where we're good at, what we're doing well, and what we need to improve on as an organization.
Absolutely, and that's a major point for having the 3 benchmarks be organization-wide. So what happens at Allen Rowe is the same thing that happens at Fortune School, is the same thing that happens at Hardy Brown, is the same thing that happens at William Lee. We're absolutely committed to making our benchmarks align. So again, the question about whether or not there was a final, if there's a final, it's something that I love the idea of a culminating project at each grade level. I think that's actually in the I think that's a part of the Common Core. So I think adopting that is a strong way to go. Okay, Mr. Gambino, did you want to add?
Just quickly, so just to clarify, like this year, there's been a lot of questions surrounding the reporting the benchmark being for parts. Like,
right.
In my class, they take the benchmark and report it out, but it doesn't impact their grade.
Right.
So I mean, if there's a change in that, I think that's going to need to really be declared.
Yes. And absolutely.
Clearly.
And yeah, and I think that's a huge part of this too. Having something that we do system-wide, having something that we have, the expectation is that you are ready to meet this standard, means that we expect our students to meet that standard, which means that the benchmarks would be part of the grade, of their final grade for that trimester. So that's a huge part. Now, we could talk about how much it should be weighted all we want. That's a discussion for another time. I'm going to bring back in Hardy Brown now. Can you guys unmic yourselves? No more mic. Can you guys hear me? Or turn on your mic? Hello. Oh.
Unmute the mic.
You are unmuted. Hello, how are you? How was your guys' conversation?
Press the button.
It was productive.
Okay, ours was very robust. I think I want to start by hearing what you guys have to say, and then I'm going to summarize what we talked about, and then we may continue the conversation from there. I am going to share our screen with you so you can see us for a little while. I'm going to kind of put everybody else here too so you can see all of us. So what did you guys come up with in terms of whether or not to have a final versus only 3 benchmarks and so on and so forth? Where did you guys fall in that conversation? Oh, we can't hear you.
We said that it would be
One mic. One mic, one set of speakers. That's all you need is the same one.
We said that it would be better if we had the 3 benchmarks without the final, because it would indicate better results for us, for our students.
Okay. So 3 benchmarks, no final is what I'm hearing, right?
Right.
Okay. Excellent. And we really kind of came to the same conclusion over here. One thing that we talked about instead of having a final test was having a culminating project in place of that final test that kind of at each grade level encapsulated all of the standards. What do you guys think about that?
We heard that and we agree.
Yeah.
You agree? Okay. So I think where we stand now is that we would have 3 benchmarks. Each grade level would have a testing window where the benchmark had to be done. Non-testing grades, that benchmark would have to be done at the end of the school year. Testing grades would have to be about 2 weeks before the Smarter Balance test, and then everybody would be doing a culminating project setting up for that. So lower grades might be using that culminating project to get ready for the final, whereas the upper grades would be using it as a way for kids to remediate their grades and get where they need to be promoted. But that way our data it kind of shows. Did I get everybody on that? Does that sound right?
Can I clarify something just a
Oh,
second?
you got it. I'll mute mine and then put back Ashley on.
Perfect. Hi,
Okay.
Ashley.
Hi. Wait.
I muted it.
Got
I did it. Okay. Can you hear me?
I can. Loud and clear.
I hear nothing.
Speaker up.
Oh. It would help if I turned the volume up. Can you hear me now?
I can absolutely hear you.
Okay. So I wanted to clarify with the testing grades. You said that we were taking the third benchmark when?
About 2 weeks before the Smarter Balance test. So about halfway through April is what I would assume. Now, we actually brought up a different part of that, but let me hear what you have to say about it first before I tell you where we went with that.
My only concern is that we don't start our third trimester until March, right? So we take the Smarter Balance test in April. So it would just, I guess the time frame for me is just, it would seem everything would be really rushed to try to get them to take the third benchmark.
Okay. So I have two questions. I think our calendars are going to be better aligned than that this year. Meaning, I don't think your Smarter Balance test is going to be that early in the year. I could be wrong, but that's definitely something that we would have a concern. We would have to look at for sure. I think also the other part of our conversation that we had here was possibly leaving the third benchmark for after the Smarter Balance test, but making sure that we had a way to monitor progress and making sure we were still filling all those gaps. Because normally what we did is we gave the final 2 weeks in advance, so that way we could cram in anything students were missing.
Okay.
We would eliminate that if we didn't do that. So do you have a stance on which way you think that should go?
I really like the idea of having the third benchmark after the Smarter Balance test.
Okay.
If it had to be in April. But if it was later, like you said, that's something that we can look at.
Okay.
So I definitely like the second option.
Okay. So the second option being that we do the test after the Smarter Balance test.
Yes.
Right.
Okay. Okay. What about over here? How do we feel about that?
Why would it be before? It's too soon. You can't hear anything. Are you supposed to be hearing something?
They turn their mics off.
We don't hear a thing. I don't know.
Oh my God.
It could lead to questions about how we're assessing and whether or not we are assessing at a high enough rigor level and that we're doing what we're supposed to.
He needs to know that we don't even know.
I'm going to share responses in just a second. I know it's hard to continue this conversation like this, so give me just a second. I think, okay, so let's back up just a little bit. I think the thing is
I asked
we want our data to be in as much alignment as possible with what we get on our test results from the statewide test. We want that alignment to be there. If it's tremendously off, it raises red flags. Now, is it going to be 1 year of red flags and we're shut down? Absolutely not. That's not going to happen. All of our schools have a track record of success. All of our schools have a track record that says, hey, this is good. The problem is if it becomes habitual. That's when we start to get questions about the rigor of our assessments, the rigor of our benchmarks, and whether or not we're reporting data that actually shows what the kids know. So what you want is the opposite. You want our results to say, oh, the kids did pretty good, not as good as they could have done, there's room for growth, and then the Smarter Balance test to come out and say, nah, your kids did great. That's what you want. You don't want the opposite. You don't want our kids did pretty good, and then the Smarter Balance test comes out and it says, no, your kids bombed. That's what we don't want to have happen.
Can you hear it? Because I'm going to mute mine.
Okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The key is how well are we tracking our students?
See, that's fine. I
And
get.
we know where the gaps are. Those gaps. Now, hopefully, with Illuminate, we'll not only have the benchmark assessment, but we'll have everything we do, and we'll be able to say we're covering those gaps all the time. So by the time we get to the test, we can say, okay, the data that we have is all aligned. All the data that we have compiled right now says this is what the kid knows, this is what the kid doesn't know. We take the Smarter Balance test, and that data perfectly aligns with what happened. Does that make sense? But
Yeah.
we have to have a way to know what those gaps are. Traditionally, in our organization, we've used a final cumulative test a couple weeks before the actual test. That to tell us what our kids need to be retaught before they take the cumulative test. And so the question is, do we want to do that anymore? And if we're not going to do that, how are we going to make sure that we're getting that reteaching in without that here's your wake-up call data that needs to be addressed? That's the question. So I think I'm comfortable with 3 benchmarks and leaving it. We're going to have a conversation about when that benchmark happened. I think the idea of having a culminating assessment at the end is definitely something that I'm comfortable with too. As I want to make sure that I've kind of encapsulated where everybody's at, because this is the information I'm going to take back and sort of write up. And then what I want is to look at the planning piece. Is there let's look at the 2 planning pieces. The first one that we're going to look at is template 2. This is template 2. And the question really comes down to, would you prefer to have the content standards listed on top and the Common Core standards listed on the bottom? Or would you rather have them right next to each other, left and right? Okay, so I hear left and right. Is that kind of unanimous here?
Yes.
Okay, left to right. So the template 2 is the one that you guys like the best.
Template 2.
The one that's up. Okay, now, what changes, if any, do you want to make to it? And maybe we should go back to, you have some time to talk about it and we'll come back. I know it's already 4:30, so I don't want to hold you too long. You guys have done some amazing work already as it is, and I really appreciate it. Yeah.
I keep going back to focus on 5. And I feel like if you've got the content standards, I'm looking at this. When I look at the content standards, I'm going to hit the content standards, which is my brain, what my brain's going to see. Then I'm going to roll over to these content standards, meet these Common Core standards. I'm thinking, switch that. I should know these Common Core standards. And then I should know what content standards from this are going to meet here, because this is my meat. All of this is my dressing.
Okay.
I should.
So you think it should be reversed?
This is my brain work.
Right.
I think it should be reversed. And like they said, to learn to write, you gotta write. To learn this Common Core stuff, that needs to be more targeted.
Okay. So Ms. Howard just brought up the point that she thinks that the content standards and the Common Core standards are backwards. I'm going to go to benchmark 3 where you see that the most clearly. If you look here at theme 4, it's got the content standards on the left and the Common Core standards on the right. She thinks it should be the reverse of that. And by having it be the reverse of that, it makes the focus the Common Core standards instead of the content standards. I'm going to say the reason why we had the content standards listed first, they're the easiest thing to find, because they're listed directly in your curriculum. And literally, I'm not asking you to write out the content standards. You can just put the numbers for those. You're going to have to write out the Common Core standards.
Okay.
I want that emphasis. You have to get to know the Common Core standards. Does that make sense to you, Ms. Howard? I'm going to take other questions too. I want to make sure that we're addressing Ms. Howard's concerns, because I think it's very valid. So, what do you think about that?
I'm not quite sure. I mean, it's just where, where things are put on the page really signifies its focus to you. So whether I'm writing all the content standards, whether I'm doing the numbers, it's just kind of like, an outline. This is my Common Core standards, my content underneath it, because that's my umbrella.
Okay.
All of this, is covering all.
Okay. So I'm going to go Ms. Williams and then Craig. Yes.
My brain is focusing. If Common Core is what I'm doing, I prefer the word aligned with content. If they're aligned with my Common Core standards, with that.
I can definitely make those changes. So, Ms. Williams brought up the fact that she likes the word aligned to be on the content standards being aligned to our Common Core, because Common Core is our focus, as opposed to aligning the Common Core standards to the content standards. I'm going to take Craig, and then I'm going to come back to Hardy Brown. Craig, what do you think? You had a comment?
I like that makes complete sense for what I'm saying. The first column involved almost. That's very important for our mind. So I agree with that. But the reason that
Mrs. Carson's extension. Okay, thank you. Bye bye.
About just the number. One-to-one correspondence left. Right-hand column, which now is constant first, because that's what our curriculum provides.
Right.
That's fine. And then go to the left, put in the corresponding appropriate.
This is crazy, girl. This is just to make them talking. So, yeah.
They really are hitting all of the Common Core standards and not missing them just because of what the content standards don't hit.
Right. And so really the gaps that are being filled are the Common Core standards too. We're not going to be backfilling content standards. To meet Common Core needs, we're going to do it, the Common Core standards is where we're going to fill in. So I'm in agreement with that. Does everybody agree with that statement?
I wish I could.
I will. I'm going to fill you in just a second. Okay?
Content standards
That's 6.
does
Oh. Yeah.
content standards. Yes.
Mute my microphone.
3 of them are Common Core.
Are you
2 of them they don't matter because they don't have a Common Core focus, but we're missing some Common Core over the course of the year because there are Common Core standards that aren't addressed at all in our curriculum. So we still have to fill in some slots to make sure that we're hitting all of the Common Core standards.
So
we don't care what it really correlates to in content.
Okay, so to summarize, Ms. Williams, Ms. Howard, and Mr. McJunkin all brought up the point that our focus really should be on the Common Core standards, which means that should be on the left. And I think the term aligned is misused. I think corresponding is a better word because we are going to use corresponding Common Core standards that go with our curriculum, but also that we understand that there's going to be some gaps we have to fill in with the Common Core standards on the left side. And using the tool, the expectation should be to write out both the Common Core standards and the content standards so we can see where those gaps are between the content standards and the Common Core standards. What do you guys think at Hardy Brown? Did you guys hear me on that?
Yes, I had to mute the microphone. I actually liked your original idea with numbering the content standards and writing out the Common Core standards to bring focus to the Common Core standards, but I could see the idea behind placing both of them on the document so that you can fill in gaps. So, I mean, I would rather just number and write out the Common Core standards just to save time because we're always pressed. But I think it's probably good to invest the time in doing both so that we can see the gaps, like you said earlier. So, and either way is fine. I mean,
Okay.
as long as it's all down on one document and we're able to kind of track and pace and find out where we're going to end up, I think I'm in it for the overall objective. So.
Right, and I'm going to take a comment from Mr. Gambino, and then I have a little bit of a response to that too. Mr. Gambino?
So I just, correct me if I'm wrong, so the understanding will be then that we can work on this as a grade level regardless of school site so that we could break up this work.
Exactly.
That's great. But the other question I have is maybe we can develop like a key or a legend since we know there are going to be gaps. If we have a consistent way of highlighting those and showing that easily,
Absolutely.
I think that'll make it great between all the different grade levels to see easily. Okay, this
That's a good idea.
it's noted somehow very clearly, very visually that the grade levels.
I just wish we have the same definitions for distinguishing gaps between Common Core and content.
And vice versa.
He's going to come back. So that's what he's going to do.
That's a great idea. So I don't know if you guys heard that or not. Mr. Gambino had a great idea in that he said it would be a good idea to develop a key that identifies, so it's the same at each grade level, that where you identified the missing Common Core standards with either a color code or something along those lines, so you know that this is something that you have to identify additional materials for in order to meet that standard. Is that right? Did I? Okay.
Yes.
I think that's a great idea. Is there anybody that has an additional idea that we can add to that, or thinks that's not necessary? I'm sure you all think it's necessary. No. Anything else you want to add to it, Miss Hardy Brown? Is there anything else we can add? Say that again?
I can't think of any right now. I think that color idea was the best thing since sliced bread. And we're having technical difficulties over here.
Okay. All right. So I think I think we're gonna wrap up with that. I think we're in a good place to wrap up here. Let me be the first to say I really appreciate that today went as well as it did. It was great talking to everybody. You guys really brought a lot to this, and I hope that this is what you want. I think the one conversation that we're having about numbering versus writing out the standards, that's something that we can continue to have that conversation too. I will say that while I said opposite of Craig at the initial part of this, I think he's right in the sense that this is our first time working with the Common Core standards. And because this is our first time through, it might be I think it will be very valuable to work it out longhand, so to speak. And as we get better at it, then we can shorten that and figure out ways to be more efficient. We don't know how long we're going to be using this specific curriculum. I can tell you that the discussions about the curriculum, not only organizationally, but statewide, are that the adoption for ELA isn't going to even happen until 2016. And then once it happens, there's language written into the adoption law that says you can continue to use the same curriculum you've always had, which means you don't even have to necessarily adopt a new curriculum if the curriculum you have is working for you. There's a lot of ramifications to that. There's a lot of things that go with that, so we really have to do our best to make do with what we have and use it as well as we can to meet the standards that we have. And by doing that, we can identify where our areas of need are. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
Okay. Really, really good job. Thank you so much. Please, please, please nudge your people at your sites. And I saw your note about Hardy Brown. 10, you guys are almost all the way there. Please make sure that you give a nudge to your principal, to give a nudge to the staff to fill out the form so we can continue to use it. A lot of what we talked about today is coming from that. do not worry about meeting in your committees before next week. We will have definitely some time to break off into committees next week. And if not, we'll have those discussions in the same way. But don't feel like you have to give yourself additional time right now. We'll be fine without that between now and then. Thank you again. Have a great night. I need to borrow for a second, and then and so it's not and it's not a committee meeting so much as it is there's other pieces. So we're good to go. Are you guys ready to sign off? Hardy Brown? Already signed off, maybe?
We're out.
They're gone. All right. I think they were having technical difficulties, so the fact that they made it as long as they did is promising. Hello, Miss Garrison. You're going to have to watch the video because we just finished up. Okay?
Writing it out. There was a saying that they kept using was abbreviated standards.
Huh. I like that. I like that a lot. So I may have accidentally